which 4Runner is right for you, which trims should you look at, which trims should you avoid, and how does it stack up against the competition. That's what this video is about. If you want to know what it looks like, how it drives, etc., that's part one of this video, basically the full review. So with that out of the way, let's just dive into this Toyota Dinosaur. For 2022, it's going to start at $38,105. And for 2023, the 4Runner is going to live on at least for one more year. We don't know whether the new 4Runner that is widely expected is going to be a 2024 or maybe a 2025, but at this point in time, the Dinosaur rolls on. And at least for the 4Runner, and for the moment, it's more of an asset than a liability, and that's why its sales have been skyrocketing. Because for $38,105, it comes very well equipped. We get the standard LED headlights, 17-inch alloy wheels. It is rear-wheel drive. Keep that in mind if you want the four-wheel drive one, that is extra. But we get the V6 engine standard, the 8-inch infotainment system that you saw on the inside in the full review, that is standard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You also get a power driver's seat and the Toyota Safety Sense P package, which gives you adaptive cruise control, pre-collision autonomous braking, etc. I especially appreciate the active safety equipment that's standard. Even in a lot of luxury brands, you have to pay extra for adaptive cruise control. Now let's walk through the lineup. So that $38,105 starting point, that's for the SR5 trim. If you want the TRD Sport trim, which is what I was driving, I did not have a absolute base trim and I didn't have the fully loaded model. I really just had one up from the base. That gives you the 20-inch wheels, TRD styling. It is still rear-wheel drive, however, for $40,950. You can get four-wheel drive, and if you like the look of the TRD package but you don't want to pay as much, then that's what the TRD Sport is for. This trim is also going to be a good bet if you plan on modifying your 4Runner. So if you're the kind of person that wants to lift it, put different wheels, tires, etc. on it, get the TRD Sport with four-wheel drive. It's going to be a better value than some of the upper-end trims. You are going to miss out on some of the creature comforts on the inside, like the dual-zone automatic climate control, heated seats that you can find in other trims, but I think it's a pretty good blend of features. Again, I love the fact that we have all that active safety tech standard, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, also standard, air conditioning standard, all that sort of stuff there. Now, if you want features like keyless go, heated mirrors, heated front seats, the soft text imitation upholstery, then you're going to need to get the SR5 premium trim. That's going to be $41,515. Next step up from there is a pretty big jump. That's the limited trim for just over $47,600. That gets you the chrome bits on the inside, the power moonroof, two-zone automatic climate control finally, real leather upholstery, and if you get the all-wheel drive system, then it's different in the limited version versus the entire rest of the 4Runner lineup. Why Toyota still has a torsion center differential in that model and they just go with a part-time four-wheel drive system in the other models, I'm not entirely clear. I think it would make more business sense if they just had the same four-wheel drive system in all of them, but they don't. So keep in mind, the limited trim, it's not going to be, generally speaking, as capable as the others, but if you want four-wheel drive simply for added traction in snow, wet weather, etc., then the limited's actually going to be better because you can use its four-wheel drive system even on dry pavement, parking lot maneuvers, etc. There's not going to be any binding because of the design of the system. In fact, the design of that system works a little bit more like some of Audi's classic Quattro models. Obviously, as you work your way on up the trim ladder, the exterior styling of the vehicle changes a little bit. After the limited trim, we then go back into the off-road trims. The first one is the TRD off-road trim, $41,935. That gets you all the TRD styling bits back. Four-wheel drive becomes standard, as is the multi-terrain program, crawl control, 17-inch all-season tires. They call these mud and snow on the website, but that's what all-season tires are. Manual climate control, and you can get the kinetic dynamic suspension system in the TRD off-road version. You can also get it in TRD off-road premium. That's $44,880, and it gets a lot of the premium bits from the SR5 package inserted into the TRD package here. So heated mirrors, heated seats, soft text upholstery, things like that. Sort of like the more off-road SR5. Then we get the TRD Pro model. This is the pinnacle of the 4Runner lineup at the moment because the 4Runner really is skewing towards those outdoorsy, adventure-y types, really. This gives you all-terrain tires, not all seasons, skid plates, even more TRD logos, big roof rack, the big Toyota grille on the front, so definitely a different look on the outside, all-weather floor mats, and importantly, Fox shocks as well. So if you're planning on doing more aggressive off-roading from the factory as a factory-equipped vehicle, then you're going to want the TRD Pro. But there is an argument to be made that if you wanted to do real serious off-roading, the TRD Pro might be a waste of money because you might be better off getting some of the lower-end trims and then doing all the modifications yourself. The reason that TRD Pro and TRD Off-Road exist in this lineup is because Toyota realized they were leaving money on the table. People were doing this aftermarket anyway, and they wanted a piece of the pie. Basically the same reason that we find wilderness trims available in the Subaru Outback, etc., although clearly these are more capable off-road than the wilderness trims. I love the fact that Toyota is still offering a third row in the 4Runner, but you should know that it's only available in a select number of trims. Basically SR5, SR5 Premium, and the limited trim. So if you want the top-end version, the TRD Pro version, you can't get a third row in that particular one. Now let's move on to the tricky subject of competition. This vehicle lives in a world that just doesn't exist anymore. You go back 20 years ago, and there were a ton of body-on-frame SUVs running around America in this same sort of size class with a actual frame, solid rear axle, independent front suspension, or perhaps a solid axle up front as well. That's the world that the 4Runner was born into, the world where the GMC Envoy existed, the Saab 97X Aero, etc. The land was full of them, but everybody else has abandoned them. The only thing we have left as far as close fits would be the Jeep Wrangler, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and the Ford Bronco. In many ways, the 4Runner sits between worlds, between a Wrangler and the Grand Cherokee. The Grand Cherokee is a unibody vehicle. One might call it a crossover. Of course, Jeep doesn't like to do that. And then, of course, we have the Wrangler, which is a body-on-frame SUV. But the Wrangler's pretty different. Let's talk about it first. Obviously, the Wrangler still has solid front axles. That's a big differentiator between these two vehicles. It's also designed as a convertible. So if you want to take the roof off, the doors off, the windshield off, etc., you're only going to be able to do that in the Wrangler. As with everything, there are compromises with the Wrangler's design. Having the solid front axle means that it's really not great out on the road. Nobody's buying a Wrangler for its driving dynamics. But by the same token, some of the options with four-corner independent suspension are going to be much more civilized than the 4Runner. The interesting twist with the 4Runner is that there are aftermarket kits to give you a solid front axle if you want to, but obviously that's a more complicated change. And if you are the kind of person that's going to go out there, lift their 4Runner, swap out the front axle, give it 37s, I would argue you might have been better served by just getting a four-door Wrangler. Of course, if you want a two-door model, that's also available in the Wrangler. There are a bunch of different engines available, a 2-liter turbo. There's also a diesel engine if you want to do that, and arguably more aftermarket lifted accessories available in the Wrangler. Now, which vehicle is right for you? Well, if you're interested in reliability, obviously, that's going to be the 4Runner. If you're interested in off-road capability from the factory, hands down, that is going to be the Jeep. If you want to conquer the Rubicon Trail in a more or less factory Jeep, you can do that in certain models of the Wrangler, but if you want to take things to the next level, it's going to require modifications on both of these vehicles. It's just going to require less modification over there on the Jeep side, and there's some extra engines to help back that up. Also, if you want a plug-in hybrid, you can do that in the Wrangler, although that's a pretty pricey option. If you want to take your top off, that's the Jeep. And if you want to hold a military coup somewhere in the Middle East, that's probably going to be the 4Runner. Moving on, we have the Jeep Grand Cherokee. This is the other side of the Jeep envelope. Jeep really has a split personality, I guess you could say, over the last 30 or 40 years. There is definitely the off-road oriented side of Jeep, and then there is the luxury side of Jeep. And that's where we find the Grand Cherokee, the Wagoneer, the Grand Wagoneer, the Grand Cherokee L, etc. It's worth noting at this point in time, Jeep actually sells more on-road focused vehicles than they sell off-road focused vehicles. The Wrangler has had a day in the sun for sure. It is selling 200,000 some odd units a year, but the Grand Cherokee, it sells more, and it's more expensive, of course. If you're looking for higher towing ability, a bigger third row, V8 options, air suspensions, all that kind of stuff, leather dripping from every corner, you're going to find that in the Grand Cherokee. Real wood upholstery, extra screens tossed all around the inside, etc. All of that's going to happen there. But because of all those changes, it's arguable that the Grand Cherokee is not going to be quite as capable after modification versus the 4Runner, but it is worth noting that the most off-road capable versions of the Grand Cherokee are very, very good right from the factory. There is definitely a solid dedication to that, lots of ground clearance, even though it does have an independent suspension. The adaptive air suspension is excellently tuned. We definitely have a smoother off-road experience in the Grand Cherokee as well. A lot more money has been spent on the software as far as the crawl control, hill descent control goes, etc. All of those are much more polished than what we find in the 4Runner. But the ability to modify the Grand Cherokee aftermarket is pretty limited because of its suspension design. If you buy the Trailhawk version of the Grand Cherokee and you decide you want to lift it 6 inches, that is incredibly expensive. Buy a 4Runner, want to lift it 6 inches, a lot less expensive. Moving on, we have the Ford Bronco, which sits in a way somewhere between these worlds. We can obviously take the top off of the Bronco and the doors off, but the windshield doesn't come off. And like the 4Runner, it has an independent front suspension. So the mission with the Bronco was to make it about as capable from the factory as the Wrangler, but perhaps a little less capable if you modify your vehicle. So there is some logic to be said that if you're going to take your Wrangler to the absolute limits, then it could go further than the Bronco. But of course, like the 4Runner, there are now some solid front axle swap kits available for the Bronco. So if you wanted a solid axle, looks like you can do that aftermarket yourself. But again, we're talking about from the factory. The Bronco is pretty hard to find right now. On the other hand, the 4Runner seems to be pretty easy, even though it is selling really well in the United States. So if you're worried about availability, if you're worried about reliability, durability, etc., we have a proven track record in the 4Runner. And again, that's part of the sales proposition for this vehicle. It has a tried and true engine, a tried and true transmission, axle designs, four-wheel drive designs, etc., that have been around a really long time. So parts are easily available, they're relatively inexpensive, and they're pretty durable. If you're one of the many shoppers out there that's looking at a 4Runner Limited and maybe you have a slightly larger budget, then I would suggest taking a look at the Lexus GX460 because it's very much the same thing. It's a close cousin to the 4Runner. They share some of the design under the skin, but obviously very different sheet metal, very different interiors, etc. Now, the GX has been refreshed more thoroughly over its run in the United States. This is known worldwide as the Land Cruiser Prado, the smaller version of the Land Cruiser worldwide. In the US, it's the Lexus GX. It has a 4.6-liter V8 engine under the hood and a 6-speed automatic transmission, so a little bit more modern than the engine and transmission that we find in the 4Runner. Definitely higher towing ability. It's going to be faster out on the road. It's going to feel peppier. It has an excellent sound. But the interior, I think, is the really big difference. The interior of the 4Runner is definitely a blast from the past, but the interior of the GX, for whatever reason, even though it's not itself terribly modern in the Lexus lineup, still looks good and looks more modern. They've also massaged the interior around a little bit more recently, so Lexus put one of their large touchscreen horizontal displays, it's around 10 inches or so, in the dashboard, and you don't have to use the Lexus controller anymore. It is a touchscreen. It runs Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, etc. So that experience feels more modern, more crisp. Then we have the wood, the leather, etc., all of that going on inside. Four-wheel drive is standard on the Lexus GX, as is the third row. And then, of course, there are a ton of options you can add to the model as well, driving it way above that $57,000 $200 starting price. But I would say if you're shopping for a 4Runner Limited that itself can get up to just under $52,000, then it's worth taking a look at the Lexus GX. As good as the resale value is on the Toyota 4Runner, it actually appears to be a little bit better at the moment on the Lexus GX. So if that's something that you're worried about, you might want to take a look at that model. And if you're leasing the vehicle, because of that higher resale value, the lease price in the Lexus may actually not be any higher or much higher at all than the 4Runner. To be honest, I think some of the 4Runner's success is intentional and some of it is unintentional. The abandonment of this particular segment by everybody else in the automotive industry has left room for the 4Runner to flourish, sort of in the way that the Tacoma flourished after the Ford Ranger left the United States. But also, the 4Runner is a really good value, and if you're looking for something that's a little bit tougher but reliable, fuel economy is not a huge concern for you, fuel economy is pretty bad in the 4Runner if you didn't already know, then this is going to be an excellent option to look for. Just over $38,000 from the base model is not far off the price range of a Toyota RAV4 or a Honda CR-V, but you get a bigger vehicle with a big cargo area in the back, a more rugged suspension if you live out in the country, and you get the availability of a third row if that's something that you're interested in as well. So if your money's on the line, what would you get? Let me know down there in the comment section below. It's not really a competitor to the Wrangler, but would you Wrangler for that different look and the off-road capability, or would you 4Runner for the reliability, but definitely miss out on that fuel economy? Let me know down there. And if you're shopping for one, definitely give that Lexus LX a hard look. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those social places. I'll see all of you next week.